Here's a take that'll annoy people. The modern blockbuster is a coward. It spends $300 million and still says nothing. In 1968, Stanley Kubrick built the future out of plywood and paint, no computers, and nobody has surpassed it since. The 1960s had no CGI and no safety net, so they led with ideas. These 17 films prove it, and they should embarrass every studio that came after. Number 17. Village of the Damned, 1960. An entire English village drops unconscious for hours. When everyone wakes, every woman of childbearing age is pregnant, and the children they deliver are eerily identical. Platinum hair, glowing eyes, and a single shared intelligence that can force any adult to obey. That's the whole nightmare, and the film never once cheapens it. There's no rubber monster here, no gore, no spectacle. The horror is a row of calm, beautiful children walking in perfect formation and a set of luminous eyes turning slowly toward you. George Sanders plays the professor who realizes the only way to stop them is to blow them up, while frantically picturing a brick wall in his mind, because these children can read every thought that slips through. Based on John Wyndham's novel, it grasps the rule modern horror keeps forgetting. What you withhold is scarier than what you show. It runs barely 77 minutes and wastes none of them. No bloated lore, no franchise setup, no sequel bait, just a tight, chilling idea executed with total control. Today, a studio would drown that premise in effects and explain every mystery to death. Wolf Rilla explained almost nothing and terrified everyone. That isn't what a small budget forces on you. That's what confidence looks like. The exact confidence the modern blockbuster has misplaced somewhere between the writer's room and the render farm. Number 16. First Men in the Moon, 1964. Long before a single computer touched a frame, one man could make you believe in a moon full of monsters. Ray Harryhausen, the greatest stop-motion artist who ever lived. This adaptation of H.G. Wells frames itself cleverly. A modern United Nations moon landing discovers a tattered British flag already planted up there, and a handwritten note, so the story flashes back to a trio of Victorians who beat everyone to it in a sphere coated with an anti-gravity paint called Cavorite. Once they arrive, Harryhausen takes over. Insectoid selenites scuttling through crystal caverns, giant caterpillar-like moon cattle lumbering across the surface, an entire alien civilization animated frame by painstaking frame using his dynamation process. Here's what still humbles a modern effects house. Every one of those creatures was moved by hand, a fraction of a millimeter at a time, and given a personality no algorithm can fake. There is a weight to Harryhausen's monsters, a handmade soul, that flawless CGI somehow sands right off. You can render a perfect creature today and feel nothing looking at it. His imperfect ones felt alive, and audiences loved them for it. It's playful, inventive, and genuinely awestruck by the idea of exploration, the sense of wonder so many modern blockbusters have quietly traded for exhausting noise. One artist with clay, wire, and monk-like patience conjured a whole world. That's not a limitation of the era. That's craftsmanship most productions can no longer be bothered to attempt, because a computer is faster and a deadline is a deadline. And notice the ambition of the framing itself. A story insisting that ordinary Victorians, armed with nothing but curiosity and a mad inventor's paint, reach the moon before the space race even began. It treats exploration as something worth chasing for its own sake, a value the blockbuster machine now tends to regard as a marketing problem. Number 15. X, The Man with the X-Ray Eyes, 1963. Roger Corman shot this in a matter of days for pocket change, and it contains a bigger, darker idea than most films made for 100 times the money. Ray Milland plays Dr. James Xavier, a scientist who develops eye drops that let him see through solid matter. At first, it's a miracle. He diagnoses patients no one else can, peers beneath the skin, reads the hidden machinery of the world. But the effect won't switch off. His vision keeps intensifying, deeper and deeper, until he can see through everything: clothing, walls, the sky, and finally, unbearably, all the way to something burning at the center of the universe that no human mind was ever meant to look at. It's a perfect little tragedy about the horror of seeing too much, and Milland sells every stage of the descent, from wonder to obsession to raw terror. Its final scene remains one of the most disturbing endings the genre ever produced. A revival tent, a preacher thundering that if thine eye offends thee, pluck it out, and a last image that lands like a hammer to the chest. Modern blockbusters routinely spend fortunes and still leave you with nothing to carry home. Corman spent almost nothing and left audiences haunted for life. That's the trade this whole list keeps exposing. A genuinely unsettling idea, followed all the way to its bleakest conclusion, beats spectacle every single time. And the effect itself was almost nothing. A few simple optical tricks and Millen's haunted, widening stare carrying the entire film. It understands that dread lives in a face and an idea, not in a budget line. You forget the explosions by the parking lot. You never forget those eyes. Number 14. Robinson Crusoe on Mars, 1964. 50 years before a certain hit stranded a botanist on the Red Planet and got called groundbreaking, this modest film did it first, and took the problem more seriously than you'd ever expect. An astronaut crash lands on Mars, his crewmate dead, played, in an early role, by a pre-Batman Adam West, and he must survive alone with a monkey named Mona and almost nothing else. The film actually thinks it through. Where does he find breathable air, water, food? He learns to burn certain rocks for oxygen, rations everything, digs in against the cold nights. It treats survival as a genuine engineering puzzle rather than a backdrop for action, and for 1964 its science is startlingly considered. The look is the other triumph. Byron Haskin shot the Martian landscape in Death Valley, and those stark, blistered vistas, a lone human figure dwarfed by an indifferent wilderness, carry a real, aching loneliness. It's beautiful in a way that has nothing to do with budget, and everything to do with composition and restraint. There's pulp here too. Once an alien Friday enters the story, and slavers arrive from the sky. But the heart of it is one person against a hostile world, holding on by his wits. Modern survival spectacles pile on the disaster set pieces and forget the silence. This one understood that the deepest tension is quiet. A man, a rock, a dwindling supply of air. It outdreamed a franchise-era blockbuster by half a century, on a fraction of the money. It even dares to sit in long stretches of near silence, letting the emptiness of the planet press down on both the man and the audience, the kind of confident quiet a modern tentpole would panic and score over within seconds. Number 13. The Time Machine, 1960. George Pal's adaptation of H.G. Wells opens with one of the most quietly magical effects ever filmed. And it isn't a monster or a machine. It's a shop window. Rod Taylor's Traveler pushes his lever forward, and outside the glass a mannequin's dress changes with the passing fashions. The sun streaks across the sky. Snow falls and melts in seconds. Candles burn down in a blink. Time itself becomes visible. That sequence won the Academy Award for Special Effects, built with stop motion, time-lapse, and sheer patience, because there were no shortcuts to take. But here's the genius. It doesn't merely show time passing, it makes you feel it. There's a melancholy in watching the world rush by while you sit perfectly still, and the film knows the emotion is the real effect. By the time the traveler reaches a distant future of gentle, childlike Eloy and the cannibal Morlocks lurking in the machinery below, and finds the great books of humanity crumbling to dust at his touch, you already understand the grief in your gut. Compare that to the modern time travel movie, which usually grinds to a dead halt so a character can diagram the paradoxes on a whiteboard for 10 minutes. Pal didn't lecture, he showed. 60 years on, a single dissolving candle in a shop window still does more with pure wonder than most blockbusters manage with an entire visual effects department and a budget that could fund a space program. The tools were primitive, the imagination behind them wasn't, and there's a warning folded into the wonder. Wells's story was always about class, the pampered Eloy, and the laboring Morlocks who feed on them, and Pal keeps that bite intact, trusting audiences to take the social critique along with the spectacle. Number 12. Marooned, 1969. 3 astronauts are stranded in orbit. Their retro rockets fail. They cannot come home. Their air is running out, and far below, a desperate, improvised rescue is the only hope. That's the entire film, and it is almost unbearably tense, precisely because it refuses to cheat. Marooned plays it straight and technical, closer to a procedural than an adventure. Gregory Peck runs the ground operation. Gene Hackman is one of the men dying up there, and the drama comes from competent people solving an impossible problem against a ticking clock and a dwindling oxygen gauge. It won the Academy Award for its visual effects, and unlike so much modern space spectacle, every shot is trying to look plausible rather than flashy. The vacuum is cold, silent, and genuinely frightening. What's eerie is how prescient it turned out to be. Released just months before the real Apollo 13 crisis, it imagined the exact nightmare of astronauts trapped in space and a nation holding its breath, decades before Hollywood would mine that same true story for its own Oscar-winning hit. Modern blockbusters tend to treat space as a playground for weightless action and roaring explosions in a place where sound cannot travel at all. Marooned treated it as what it actually is: airless, hostile, and utterly indifferent to whether you live or die up there. That commitment to realism generates more suspense than any CGI dogfight ever has. Sometimes the scariest special effect on the screen is simply the truth, filmed honestly. Watch the men ration their breathing while the engineers below run the numbers against the clock, and you feel the vacuum tighten like a fist. No villain, no monster, no invented threat, just physics, oxygen, and time, the most relentless antagonists of all. Number 11. Fantastic Voyage, 1966. The pitch sounds like a fever dream. Shrink a submarine and its crew to microscopic size, inject them into a dying man's bloodstream, and race through the human body to save his life before time runs out. The temptation today would be to render all of it inside a computer, a smooth, weightless, faintly plastic interior of veins and organs. Richard Fleischer built it instead. Enormous physical sets, membranes you could reach out and touch, a heart the size of a cathedral, antibodies that swarm and cling to a crew member until she is smothered. The inside of a human being became a genuine alien landscape aboard the submarine Proteus, lit like a glowing cavern and drifting with strange, luminous debris. It won Oscars for its art direction and its visual effects, and you can see every dollar on the screen. But more importantly, you believe it, because it has weight and texture and the specific eeriness of something that physically exists in front of a lens. Even the escape, out through the corner of the patient's eye as a single tear, feels tactile and real. There's a lesson in that submarine. When an environment is real, the actors react to something real. The light behaves like real light, and your eye stops asking questions. So much modern spectacle floats in a frictionless digital void your brain never quite settles into. Fantastic Voyage is nearly 60 years old, and it still feels like you could push your hand through a cell wall. Tangibility is a special effect too, and it's the one money keeps forgetting how to buy. Number 10. Charlie, 1968. Not every great science fiction film is about spaceships. Some are about a single, devastating question. What if you could make a man smarter, and then take it all back? Charlie, adapted from the classic story Flowers for Algernon, follows a gentle, intellectually disabled man who undergoes an experimental surgery that transforms him into a genius. For a while, the whole world opens up. He learns, he reads, he falls in love, he finally understands the people who used to laugh at him. And then the same experiment that made a laboratory mouse named Algernon brilliant, before the mouse faltered and died, reveals the terrible catch: the effect is temporary. Slowly, agonizingly, Charlie feels his new mind slipping away, and the cruelest part is that he is smart enough to know exactly what is happening the entire time. Cliff Robertson won the Academy Award for Best Actor for it, and you understand why in a single scene, the naked terror of a man watching his own intelligence dissolve, powerless to stop the tide. There are no effects here at all. The science fiction is entirely emotional, and it is shattering, right down to his final, heartbreaking request that someone put flowers on the mouse's grave. This is what the genre can do when it aims at the heart instead of the box office. Modern blockbusters spend hundreds of millions and rarely earn a single honest tear. Charlie needed only a premise and a performance to leave a generation wrecked. Real ideas about what makes us human don't require a render farm. They require the courage to break your audience on purpose. Number 9. The Day the Earth Caught Fire, 1961. Two nuclear superpowers detonate massive bombs at the same moment and knock the Earth off its axis, shoving the planet into a slow drift toward the sun. The world begins to warm, then bake, then die. And this British masterpiece tells that apocalyptic story not through spectacle, but through a newspaper office. We watch the end of the world from the desks of journalists at the Daily Express, chasing the story, arguing over headlines, piecing together the horrifying truth as the temperature climbs and a thick heat fog swallows London. The real former editor of the paper even plays the editor here, which grounds everything further. The catastrophe is measured in rising thermometers, water riots, and rationing rather than exploding landmarks, and that realism makes it far more frightening than any city-smashing set piece. Decades on, it plays like prophecy. A film about humanity cooking its own planet through arrogance, then arguing about it instead of acting, lands with uncomfortable force in an age of climate crisis. It even ends on a knife edge, two front pages set in type and ready to print, one reading that the world is saved, one that the world is doomed, and the film refuses to tell you which one runs. That's the difference. Modern disaster blockbusters give you the money shot, the wave, the crack, the collapse, and forget the human beings underneath. This film understood that the apocalypse is scariest when it's reported by ordinary, exhausted people who can't quite believe it's real. Dread and ideas, not destruction. It remains one of the smartest end-of-the-world films ever made. Number 8. Seconds, 1966. This one has no rockets and no robots. Its science fiction is the oldest fantasy of all, a second chance. And it might be the most quietly horrifying film on this entire list. John Frankenheimer imagines a secret organization, known only as the Company, that offers dissatisfied middle-aged men a way out. Fake your death, hand you a new face through surgery, a new body, a new identity, a whole new life. Rock Hudson, cast brilliantly against his matinee idol image, plays a reborn man who slowly realizes the dream is a beautifully decorated cage. What makes it extraordinary is the camera. Cinematographer James Wong Howe shot it with distorting wide lenses, lurching handheld movement, and faces looming into the frame like a nightmare pressed against glass. The paranoia isn't described, it is photographed. You feel watched, cornered, unsure what is real, and the film never once tells you how to feel about any of it. Even a drunken bacchanal in a vineyard curdles into something threatening. Then there's the ending, one of the bleakest final scenes in all of 1960s cinema, a gut punch the studio had every commercial reason to soften, and pointedly did not. Modern films spend fortunes trying to manufacture psychological dread and reach for a jump scare instead. Seconds reached for a lens, and a genuinely dangerous idea about identity and regret. It is still more unsettling than most horror released this year. Hard proof that real terror is built in the human mind, not in the render queue. Number 7. Fahrenheit 451, 1966. For his only English-language film, French director François Truffaut adapted Ray Bradbury's novel about a future where firemen don't put out fires. They start them, burning every book they can find. There are no laser battles. The science fiction lives entirely in mood. The eerie monorail gliding through a bland, comfortable dystopia. Citizens hypnotized by wall-sized screens they call their family. The loving, terrible close-ups of pages curling into ash. Bernard Herrmann's score aches underneath it all. Julie Christie plays two roles, the numbed, pill-swallowing wife and the curious young woman who pulls the fireman Montag toward the forbidden act of reading. Truffaut even cut the novel's mechanical hound, trusting mood over monster. That's the quiet genius of it. The film's real special effect is restraint. It doesn't need a war to convince you the world is ending. It simply shows you people who have stopped caring about ideas, staring at screens, medicated and content, and asks whether that is really so far from where we are heading. The question has aged into pure prophecy. A dystopia about the death of attention and the abandonment of books cuts deep in an age of infinite scrolling and shrinking patience. And its final image, the book people, wandering the snowy woods, each one having become a novel, reciting it aloud over and over to keep it alive for the next generation, is one of the most beautiful things the genre has ever produced. It costs nothing but imagination, and it still outclasses spectacle that costs absolutely everything. Number 6. Icarie XB1, 1963. Here's the deep cut most people watching have never heard of, and the one that quietly rewrote what science fiction was allowed to look like. Icarie XB1 is a Czechoslovak film about a massive starship on a decades-long voyage toward a distant system in search of life on another world, and the astonishing thing is how modern it looks. Sleek white corridors, clean, functional control rooms, a crew that behaves like professionals, doing a difficult job rather than heroes posing for a poster. Watch it now and you will swear you are seeing the blueprint for a dozen films and shows that came after it. Because you are. Its influence is widely credited across the science fiction that followed, from the design language of the landmark space epics to the look of the televised space adventures that would define the era just ahead. This modest film, made behind the Iron Curtain on a fraction of a Hollywood budget, was years ahead of the wealthiest studios in the West. It is thoughtful, too. In one haunting sequence, the crew boards a derelict 20th century ship and finds it full of the elegantly dressed dead, a quiet, damning verdict on the world that launched them. When it was recut and dubbed for American audiences under the title Voyage to the End of the Universe, its ending was changed to blunt those ideas for a mass market. The original is smarter, stranger, and far sadder. That's this whole list distilled into a single movie. The people with the least money were so often the only ones brave enough to think first. Number 5. Alphaville, 1965. Jean-Luc Godard wanted to set a film in a cold, controlling city of the future, a place ruled by a soulless computer that has outlawed love, poetry, tears, and emotion itself. His budget for building that future city was essentially nothing, so he simply didn't build it. Instead, Godard walked into 1965 Paris at night and shot the concrete towers, glass corridors, and harsh fluorescent hallways that already existed, and just called it the future. No sets, no effects, no matte paintings. Just real architecture, brutal available light, hard-boiled detective Lemmy Caution stalking through it, and the sheer audacity to trust the audience to travel the rest of the distance in their own heads. And it works. Alphaville feels more genuinely alien than cities that cost $100 million to render, because everything on screen is really there, casting real shadows and humming with real menace. The tyrant of this world isn't a giant robot, it's a voice, the computer Alpha 60, rasping out its cold logic. And somehow that is far more chilling than any army of drones. It won the top prize at the Berlin Film Festival, and it remains a masterclass in the most underrated tool in all of filmmaking, knowing exactly when less is the entire point. Every time a modern movie erects a sprawling digital metropolis that still somehow feels weightless and fake, remember that one director conjured a more convincing dystopia by aiming his camera at a parking garage and refusing to blink. That is vision, not compromise, and it cannot be bought. Number 4. Quatermass and the Pit, 1967. On paper, this is just a monster movie from Britain's Hammer Studio. In practice, it holds one of the biggest, most disturbing ideas the genre has ever dared to put on a screen. Workers digging a new London Underground station unearth what they assume is an unexploded wartime bomb. It isn't. It's an ancient spacecraft, buried for 5 million years, and inside are the preserved remains of its crew, insect-like creatures from Mars. That's merely the setup. What the film does next is breathtaking. It proposes that these Martians meddled with early humanity, seeding our brains with their own violent instincts, and that everything we have ever called demonic, the horns, the devil, the wild hunt, the ancestral terror buried in our oldest myths, is in fact a racial memory of them. Our monsters aren't superstition. They're history we were too frightened to remember. Sit with the sheer ambition of that. This film is quietly rewriting human origins, religion, and the nature of evil itself, all on a Hammer horror budget, building to a climax where dormant Martian power erupts in fire across a terrified, hallucinating city. It was released in America under the blunt title 5 Million Years to Earth. That's the trade so many modern blockbusters have forgotten how to make. They will lavish a fortune on the spectacle and hand you a plot you could scribble on a napkin. Quatermass handed audiences an idea so large it reorganized the way they saw their own species, and folded it neatly into 90-odd minutes. Spectacle fades from memory, an idea that big never leaves you alone. Number 2. Planet of the Apes, 1968. By 1968, the makeup artist John Chambers had done something the industry considered nearly impossible. He created ape faces, dozens upon dozens of them, that could actually act, expressive, emotional, fully mobile around the performer underneath. It was so far beyond the state of the art that the Academy handed him an honorary Oscar, because there was no competitive makeup category yet worthy of the achievement, and all that craft serves something far sharper than a simple creature feature. Planet of the Apes, adapted from Pierre Boulle's novel with Charlton Heston as the stranded astronaut Taylor, builds an entire believable society. Its politics, its religion, its courts, its casual cruelties, and turns the whole thing into a mirror. The apes' contempt for the primitive human, their willingness to bury inconvenient truths, their terror of what science might reveal about their own origins, it is all us. It was always us. The film is a Trojan horse, pulp adventure on the outside, blistering social commentary hidden within. Then comes the ending. That final image on the beach, a reveal so perfect it has echoed through the culture for well over half a century, flips the entire film inside out in a single, wordless shot. No third-act city-leveling battle. No sequel-baiting mid-credits tease. Just one devastating truth, delivered and gone. That's the difference in miniature. Modern franchises constantly mistake more for meaning. Another set piece, another callback, another universe to set up for next summer. Planet of the Apes trusted a great performance under great makeup, a story with something urgent to say, and one unforgettable ending. The makeup still convinces today. The message still stings. Most blockbusters should be so lucky. Number 1, 2001, A Space Odyssey, 1968. Of course it's this one. Stanley Kubrick's 2001, A Space Odyssey, is the film that ends the argument. The moment 1960s science fiction reached higher than the medium ever had, using tools that by today's standards should not have been remotely enough. No CGI, no digital anything. And still, more than 50 years later, nothing has truly surpassed it. Consider what he actually did. He built a 38-foot rotating centrifuge, a single set that cost as much as some entire films of the era, so his actors could jog around the inside of a spinning spacecraft, and you would believe the artificial gravity without question. He used front projection to drop his prehistoric apes into vast, sun-scorched African landscapes at the dawn of humanity. For the mind-bending journey through the Stargate, his team invented an entirely new technique, slit-scan photography, producing shimmering corridors of light nobody had ever seen on a screen before. Every single frame was earned by hand. But the effects aren't even the reason it wins. Kubrick made a science fiction epic that dares to be silent. Space is quiet, exactly the way space actually is. No roaring engines, no laser blasts, just the vacuum, the sound of a man breathing inside his helmet, and a Strauss waltz turning a docking spacecraft into slow ballet. Hale, the soft-voiced computer, remains one of cinema's greatest villains precisely because he never once raises his voice. And the ending flatly refuses to explain itself. It trusts you completely. It hands you awe and mystery, and then lets you sit inside them. That is the single thing the modern blockbuster is most afraid to do, to slow down, to fall silent, to trust the audience with genuine wonder instead of burying them alive in noise. Kubrick did it in 1968, with plywood and paint and light, and the result still looks like it was beamed back from a more ambitious future than the one we ended up with. Give a studio unlimited money today, and it will build you an explosion. Give Kubrick a rotating drum and a Strauss record, and he built you the infinite. That was never a fair fight, and it still isn't. So why do films with a fraction of the money still win? Because they led with ideas, not noise. They trusted silence, restraint, and one perfect image over a wall of explosions. And that's the trade modern blockbusters forgot how to make. Now tell me, which 60s classic still humbles today's spectacle, and which one did I rank too low? Drop it in the comments, hit subscribe, and I'll see you back in the graveyard. There's always more to dig up.